At 2:17 in the morning, the heating system at the Arctic Research Station stopped. Not flickered, not weakened. Stopped. The temperature inside the main corridor dropped 6 degrees in less than 4 minutes. Outside, a blizzard was hammering the station so violently that the steel walls groaned with every gust. Snow had buried the emergency exits. Somewhere deep beneath the floor, a pipe cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Then Elias Cole heard something no one else noticed. A faint hiss. He froze. Gas. His eyes moved toward the maintenance corridor. "Don't open that door." Nobody listened. Dr. Richard Hale, one of the station's senior researchers, was already moving toward it. "Get out of my way," Hale snapped. "We need to check the auxiliary heater." Elias stepped in front of him. "No." Hale stared at him. For a moment neither man moved. Then Hale gave a bitter laugh. "Your maintenance, Elias. Let the experts handle this." Elias didn't answer. He was listening. The hiss had become louder. Behind the steel door was the auxiliary heating room, connected to one of the station's emergency fuel lines. If that line had ruptured, opening the door could turn the entire corridor into a furnace, or worse. Marina Vale sat several feet away in her wheelchair, wrapped in a thick thermal blanket. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were fixed on Elias. "What's wrong?" she asked. Elias looked at the temperature display, 18 degrees C inside and falling. "We have a fuel leak," he said. Hale shook his head. "That system has automatic shutoff." "It should. Then it isn't leaking." Elias finally looked at him. Something made it leak. A violent boom shook the building. The lights went out. Someone screamed. For 3 seconds, there was absolute darkness. Then the emergency lamps came on, bathing the corridor in a dim red glow. Elias moved immediately. "Everyone away from this corridor." No one argued this time. He pulled a heavy insulated jacket from a wall cabinet and handed another to Marina. She looked at him. "You knew this was going to happen?" "No." "Then how did you know where the jackets were?" "I check everything." He disappeared into the maintenance room. 30 seconds later, he returned carrying a manual shutoff wrench. Hale watched him with growing irritation. "You're going to shut the line manually?" "If the automatic valve worked, we wouldn't be standing here." Elias opened the outer panel. His flashlight moved over the machinery, then stopped. There a valve housing had been deliberately loosened. Not broken, not damaged by the storm. Loosened. Elias touched the metal. Fresh tool marks. His expression changed. Marina noticed. "What is it?" Elias slowly straightened. "Someone did this." The corridor fell silent. Hale stepped closer. "You're accusing someone?" "I'm telling you what I found." "During a blizzard?" Elias pointed at the valve. "These marks weren't made by the storm." Hale looked at the metal, then back at Elias. "You expect us to believe sabotage?" Elias didn't answer because at that moment, another alarm began to sound. Not the heating alarm, the food storage alarm. Everyone turned toward the opposite corridor. A red indicator flashed above the main provisions room. Access failure. Marina's face tightened. Why would the food storage be locked? Elias looked at the clock. 2:21 a.m. then at the temperature display. 23 degrees C then toward the dark maintenance corridor. His voice dropped. "Because whoever did this didn't come here to break one machine." Another violent gust slammed into the station. Snow exploded against the reinforced windows. Elias gripped the wrench tighter. "They're trying to make sure we can't survive the storm." And somewhere beyond the sealed walls, buried beneath more than 100 feet of snow, the last reliable communication line went dead. 36 hours before the heating system failed. No one at Blackridge Arctic Research Station thought Elias Cole would be the man they would eventually depend on. To most of the people working there, he was simply the maintenance worker. The man who repaired frozen pipes, checked generators, cleared snow from vents, and appeared in the kitchen before sunrise to help prepare breakfast. He had no doctorate hanging on the wall, no prestigious university behind his name, and no family fortune connected to the research foundation that owned the station. He wore the same dark work jacket every day, carried a battered tool bag wherever he went, and rarely spoke unless someone asked him a question. That was enough for some people to decide they knew exactly what kind of man he was. Blackridge stood hundreds of miles from the nearest permanent settlement in Alaska, surrounded by endless white ice and mountains that disappeared into storms. Inside, however, the station was almost luxurious. The scientists had heated private quarters, modern laboratories, imported coffee, expensive equipment, and a dining room overlooking the frozen wilderness. Elias slept in a small utility room near the maintenance bay. He never complained. Every morning at 5, while most of the researchers were still asleep, he walked through the station, checking temperatures, pressure gauges, backup batteries, and fuel levels. He knew which generator made a strange clicking sound when it was under stress. He knew which corridor became colder before a ventilation problem appeared. He even knew which kitchen freezer needed to be opened and closed carefully because its seal had begun to weaken. Most people never noticed these things. Elias did. One morning, Dr. Richard Hale found him kneeling beside a generator. Hale was one of the station's most respected climate scientists, and he had spent years studying Arctic energy systems. He stopped and looked down at Elias. "Still playing mechanic?" he asked. Elias glanced up. "The auxiliary generator is losing pressure." Hale frowned. "According to the system monitor, it's fine." "The monitor is fine," Elias said. "The generator isn't." Hale gave a small laugh. "You know, Elias, there are people here who spent 10 years studying this equipment." Elias tightened a bolt. "Then they should probably listen when it makes a noise." Hale walked away, shaking his head. Elias didn't follow him. He never did. He had learned long ago that people rarely respected warnings from someone they had already decided was beneath them. His mother used to tell him that the most dangerous thing in a harsh place wasn't always the weather. Sometimes it was pride. Elias had remembered those words his entire life. He had grown up in a remote Alaskan community where winter could turn a simple mistake into an emergency. His grandfather had taught him how to read wind patterns, protect body heat, repair equipment with whatever was available, and never waste fuel, because there might not be another delivery for weeks. Elias had never considered those lessons impressive. They were simply things that kept people alive. At Blackridge, however, they seemed almost invisible. The scientists trusted computers more than instincts. They trusted reports more than sounds. They trusted credentials more than experience. And Elias had become accustomed to being the person everyone ignored until something broke. That afternoon, the station's private helicopter arrived carrying Marina Vale. Conversations stopped when she entered the main building. Marina wasn't a scientist, but everyone knew her name. Her family's foundation had financed Blackridge, and she was expected to inherit control of the research organization after her father retired. Months earlier, a serious avalanche accident had left her injured and forced her into a long recovery. Now she had returned to the station in a wheelchair, determined to prove she was still capable of leading. Elias saw her from across the dining room. Their eyes met for only a second. He returned to washing a coffee pot. He had no idea that before the next sunrise, Marina would ask him for a favor that would change both their lives. And he certainly didn't know that within 36 hours, the same people who laughed when he warned them about a failing generator would be standing in a freezing corridor, waiting for him to tell them how to survive. The request came the following morning, just after 7. Elias was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a metal thermos, when Marina Vale rolled quietly through the doorway. She was alone. No assistant, no doctor, no member of the research board. Elias looked at her, then at the empty hallway behind her. "You need something?" Marina stopped beside the counter. "I need you to marry me." Elias nearly dropped the thermos. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then he looked toward the kitchen door, as if expecting someone to jump out and announce that this was a joke. Nobody did. "I'm sorry," he said. "You heard me." "I did. I'm just trying to understand whether you actually said it." Marina gave a tired smile. "I did." Elias put the thermos down. "Why?" Marina hesitated. Outside the kitchen windows, the Arctic morning was pale and almost completely white. "Because my family is trying to take everything away from me." She explained that after her avalanche accident, several members of the Foundation's board had begun questioning whether she was capable of leading the organization. Her father had stepped back from daily operations, and the board wanted Victor Grant, the former director of the Blackridge project, to take temporary control. Victor had powerful allies. He also had a reputation for being ruthless when money was involved. "They're saying I'm unstable," Marina said. "That I can't make decisions. That I need someone to manage my affairs until I'm fully recovered." Elias leaned against the counter. "And a husband fixes that, not legally by itself." but it changes the picture. She handed him a folder. Inside was a proposed agreement. Elias read the first page, then the second. It was a private marriage arrangement with financial terms, confidentiality clauses, and a clear end date. "This is a contract," he said. "It's supposed to be. So you want me to pretend to be your husband for a few months?" Elias closed the folder. "And what do I get?" Marina looked directly at him. "Enough to take care of your family's medical expenses." His expression hardened slightly. "You've been looking into me." "I had to." "You could have just asked." "Would you have told me?" Elias thought about it. "Probably not." Marina nodded. "That's what I thought." He walked toward the window. He didn't like the arrangement. He didn't like being studied. And he certainly didn't like the idea of becoming part of the wealthy world that had spent months treating him as invisible. But the number written in the agreement could change his family's situation completely. It could pay the medical bills that had been keeping him awake at night. It could give them time. "What are the rules?" he asked. Marina seemed surprised that he hadn't walked away. "We behave like a married couple in front of the board. We don't lie to each other about anything that affects the agreement. We keep our private lives separate. And when this is over, we walk away." Elias nodded slowly. "No romance. None. No pretending when we're alone. Agreed. And you don't treat me like I'm doing you a favor." Marina looked almost offended. "I wouldn't." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Everyone here does." For the first time, Marina didn't have an answer. She looked down at the contract. "Then maybe you're the wrong man for this." Elias picked up the pen. "Maybe that's why I'm the right one." He signed. Marina stared at the signature. The man she had known only as a maintenance worker had just agreed to become her husband. Neither of them knew how quickly the arrangement would become complicated. That afternoon, they announced the marriage to the senior staff. The room went silent. Dr. Hale nearly choked on his coffee. Victor Grant, standing near the window, didn't react at all. He simply smiled and congratulated them. But his eyes remained fixed on Elias. "Interesting choice," Victor said. Elias met his gaze. "I could say the same about yours." Victor's smile disappeared for half a second. Marina noticed. Later that evening, as the two of them walked through the corridor together for the first time, Marina whispered, "You didn't have to provoke him." Elias looked ahead. "I wasn't." "Then what were you doing?" "Listening." She frowned. "To what?" Elias stopped outside the maintenance bay. Somewhere behind the wall, a generator gave a faint, uneven click. He listened for another second. "That," he said. "Something's wrong." Marina stared at him. "With the generator?" Elias nodded. Then he opened the door. Inside, one of the auxiliary fuel valves had been partially disassembled, and unlike the other equipment in the room, it was warm. Freshly handled. Someone had been there only minutes earlier. The storm was supposed to arrive 2 days later. That was what the official forecast said when the morning shift began at Blackridge Arctic Research Station. By noon, however, the sky had changed. The horizon disappeared behind a wall of white, and the wind began pushing loose snow across the landing field in long, violent streams. Elias noticed it before anyone else did. He was checking the fuel gauges when he saw the pressure dropping faster than it should. He stepped outside for less than a minute and came back with ice already forming along his beard. "The storm is moving faster," he said. Dr. Hale barely looked up from his tablet. "The forecast hasn't changed." "The forecast is wrong." Hale sighed. "You can't keep second-guessing the meteorologists." Elias pointed toward the window. "You don't need a degree to see that." Victor Grant entered the room just then. He had been in his office all morning, speaking privately with members of the Foundation board. He glanced toward the window and calmly said, "The latest satellite update confirms the storm will reach us tonight." Elias looked at him. "Tonight?" Victor nodded. "Which means we have several hours." Elias didn't respond. Something about Victor's certainty bothered him. The storm wasn't behaving like an ordinary system. It was building too quickly. Within an hour, the station received an emergency weather bulletin. The storm had intensified dramatically and was now moving directly toward Blackridge. The helicopter crew was ordered to evacuate immediately, but the wind had already become too strong for a safe departure. The pilot made one attempt, then turned back. "We are grounded," he announced. "Nobody is leaving until this passes." Doors were sealed. Vehicles were brought inside. Emergency procedures began. Elias went through the station, checking every system one by one. The primary generator was functioning. The backup generator was functioning, but not perfectly. He checked the fuel storage. One of the tanks was lower than it should have been. He checked the inventory records. The numbers didn't match. Someone moved fuel, he told Marina. She looked at the report. Could it be an accounting error? Not this much. How much is missing? Elias pointed to the screen. Marina's expression changed. That's enough to keep the station running for days. Exactly. Before she could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then remained on. A few people laughed nervously. Elias didn't. He walked toward the control panel. The auxiliary generator had just lost pressure. He checked the valve. The same valve he had discovered the night before. Now it was completely loose. Someone had tampered with it again. Elias? Marina asked. He looked at her. We're not dealing with a storm anymore. Outside, the wind slammed into the station with such force that the entire structure shook. Snow covered the exterior cameras. The main satellite dish disappeared from view. Then the radio crackled. Blackridge, this is North Command. We are losing your signal. Repeat, we are losing your. Static swallowed the rest. The connection died. A few minutes later, the emergency lights came on. The main power grid had failed. The station's heating system dropped to half capacity. People began gathering in the central hall. Someone asked how long the backup fuel would last. No one answered. Elias opened the storage records again. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The food inventory had also changed. Thousands of pounds of emergency provisions were listed as having been transferred to another storage unit. But there was no second unit. Marina saw the same discrepancy. Where did the food go, she asked. Elias looked toward the sealed provisions corridor. Let's find out. They reached the main storage room. The electronic lock flashed red. Access denied. Elias tried his maintenance override. Nothing happened. Who changed the access code? Marina asked. Elias stared at the panel. Someone with administrative clearance. Behind them, Victor appeared. What's the problem? Elias turned around. The emergency food is locked. Victor looked at the door, then at Marina. We'll handle it. Elias didn't move. No, we need to open it now. Victor's expression hardened. You don't give orders here. Elias looked past him toward the temperature monitor. It had already fallen another 4 degrees. Outside, the storm was swallowing the station completely. Elias lowered his voice. Then somebody better start giving them. The lights went out again. This time they did not come back. And somewhere behind the locked food storage door, the emergency supplies that were supposed to keep 32 people alive had already been deliberately destroyed. The lights stayed out. For several seconds, nobody moved. The only sound inside Blackridge was the howl of the wind pressing against the walls and the frightened breathing of 32 people who had suddenly realized how far they were from help. Then the emergency lights flickered back on, weak and red. The temperature display above the central corridor showed 12 degrees Celsius. Elias looked at it once and knew they were in trouble. The station was designed to survive Arctic conditions, but only if its systems worked together. With the main generator down, the backup system could keep essential equipment alive. But the damaged fuel line meant the heating system could not operate normally. And the locked food storage meant they had no reliable access to their emergency supplies. Dr. Hale began giving instructions to the researchers, but his voice was already competing with panic. Everyone remained calm. The engineering team is assessing the situation. Elias almost laughed. There was no engineering team. There was him. 2 junior technicians were trapped in another section of the station, and the senior systems engineer had been outside when the storm closed in. Elias grabbed his tool bag. Marina watched him. Where are you going? The auxiliary generator. Victor said the system is being handled. Elias looked at her. Victor isn't standing next to the machine. He disappeared into the maintenance corridor. The temperature continued to fall. 15 degrees Celsius, 17 degrees Celsius. In the generator room, Elias found exactly what he expected. The fuel valve had been tampered with, and part of the pressure assembly had been removed. Whoever had done it knew enough about the system to make the failure look accidental. Elias opened his tool bag. There was no replacement part. He searched the shelves. Then the emergency equipment locker. Nothing. He closed his eyes for a moment and remembered his grandfather's voice from years earlier. When the right part isn't there, Don't waste time wishing for it. Find another way to make the system work. Elias removed a damaged connector from an old auxiliary pump. It wasn't the correct size, but with a small modification, he could make it fit. He worked with frozen fingers while the wind shook the building. Once the generator coughed and died. Elias tried again. Nothing. He hit the side of the housing with his palm. Come on. He adjusted the pressure manually, tightened the improvised connector, and pulled the starter. The engine sputtered, then stopped. Elias stared at it. Behind him, the door opened. Marina had followed him. You shouldn't be here, he said. Neither should you. I'm working. So am I. She looked at the generator. Can you fix it? Elias didn't answer immediately. I can keep it running. I can't make it healthy. How long? I don't know. Then the generator coughed again. This time, it caught. The machinery roared to life. Lights returned to part of the station. A cheer erupted somewhere down the corridor. Marina smiled for the first time that night. Elias didn't. He was looking at the fuel gauge. It was dropping too quickly. What's wrong? She asked. We don't have enough fuel. He pointed at the gauge. Even with this running, maybe 12 hours. Marina's smile disappeared. And then the station gets cold. He walked toward the provisions room. They tried the electronic lock again. Still sealed. Elias examined the panel, then pulled the cover off. Someone had overridden the emergency access system. He traced the wiring and found another bypass. A few minutes later, the lock clicked. The door opened. Marina covered her mouth. Shelves that should have been packed with emergency food were almost empty. Most of the remaining containers had been deliberately contaminated or damaged. 32 people, maybe 12 hours of fuel. Almost no food, no communications. A blizzard outside that could last for days. Elias stood silently for a moment. Then he began opening cabinets. He found dried herbs, grains, a few root vegetables, preserved beans, powdered stock, and several sealed packets of protein that had been overlooked in a secondary compartment. Not much, but enough to make something hot. Marina watched him gather the ingredients. What are you doing? Keeping people alive. With that? She looked at the small pile. Elias nodded. Heat isn't only something that comes from a furnace. He carried the ingredients into the kitchen. Soon, steam began rising from a large steel pot. The smell slowly moved through the cold corridors. People gathered around the kitchen doorway. Some looked confused. Others looked embarrassed. Dr. Hale stared at the pot. We're trapped at -30 outside, and you're making soup? Elias continued stirring. We're trapped at -30 outside, and you're complaining about soup? Hale had no answer. Elias began filling bowls. He gave the first ones to the oldest researchers and the people whose hands were shaking from the cold. He kept serving until the pot was nearly empty. Marina noticed that Elias had not taken a bowl for himself. You haven't eaten. I'll eat later. She looked at him for a long moment. You always say that. Elias finally glanced at her. Because somebody always needs it more. Outside, the storm swallowed the station beneath another mountain of snow. Inside, the people who had once laughed at the maintenance worker were now holding his warm bowls with both hands. And while everyone was focused on the food, Elias quietly noticed something else. The emergency control panel beside the kitchen had been opened recently. Someone had been inside it after the power failed. He wiped the condensation from the panel and looked at the exposed wiring. Marina, he said quietly, I don't think the storm is the biggest problem we have. By the time the last bowl was handed out, the station had become strangely quiet. The storm continued pounding against the walls, but inside the kitchen, people were no longer shouting. They were eating, slowly, carefully, holding the warm bowls between their hands, as if the heat itself were something precious. Marina sat near the end of the table, watching Elias move around the kitchen. He had already checked the generator twice, inspected the emergency panel, and made sure everyone had something to eat. Yet he still hadn't taken a bowl for himself. She finally stopped him. Sit down. Elias looked over his shoulder. I'm busy, so am I. Doing what? Marina lifted her bowl slightly. Watching you pretend you're not hungry. A faint smile appeared on his face. I'm fine. That's not an answer. He hesitated, then sat across from her. Marina pushed half of her bread toward him. Take it. You need it. So do you. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, people who had spent months arguing over research budgets and corporate authority were quietly eating the meal prepared by the man most of them barely noticed. Marina took another spoonful. "It's good." Elias shrugged. "It's soup." "No, it's better than soup." He looked at her. "You're saying that because you signed a marriage contract with me." She laughed softly. "I don't think the contract covers soup." Elias smiled. It was the first time Marina had seen him genuinely relax. Then she asked, "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Elias looked down at the bowl. "My grandfather. He was a chef?" "No. He was a man who knew what to do when there wasn't enough food." Marina listened as Elias explained that he had grown up learning how to stretch supplies, preserve heat, repair equipment, and survive when roads disappeared under snow. His grandfather had taught him that the difference between surviving and not surviving was often knowing how to use what everyone else ignored. Marina looked around the kitchen. "And that's why you took this job?" "Partly. You could probably do more." Elias gave a quiet laugh. "People here don't hire me to do more." Marina lowered her eyes. She understood what he meant. She had watched the same people dismiss him. She had even done it herself without realizing it. "I did it too," she said. Elias looked at her. "What?" "I saw your job title before I saw you." Elias didn't answer. Marina continued. "When I first came here, I thought you were just part of the staff." "I am part of the staff. That's not what I mean." She looked toward the dark windows. "You know, before my accident, I thought competence was something you could measure. Degrees, positions, money, influence." She touched the blanket over her legs. "Then one avalanche took almost everything I thought I understood about myself." Elias was quiet. "You're still here," he said. "That's not nothing." Marina looked at him. "Neither are you." Before he could respond, a faint electronic beep came from the corridor. Elias stood immediately. The warmth between them disappeared beneath his professional focus. He walked to the emergency control panel beside the kitchen and examined the exposed wiring again. Marina followed. "What did you find?" "Someone accessed this after the power failed." "Victor?" "I don't know." Elias pointed to a small data module attached beneath the panel. "But this shouldn't be here." He carefully removed it. Marina stared at the device. "What is it?" "A system logger." "Can it tell us who accessed the controls?" "If it wasn't wiped." Elias connected it to a portable diagnostic unit. The screen flickered. Lines of data appeared. Access codes. Timestamps. System overrides. Marina leaned closer. Then Elias stopped scrolling. One name appeared repeatedly. Victor Grant. Marina's face changed. "That's impossible." Elias looked at her. "Why?" "Because Victor was in the command room when the power failed." Elias looked back at the screen. "Then we need to find out how he was controlling the system." The storm roared outside. Marina slowly realized that the cold was no longer the only thing threatening them. Someone inside Blackridge had been preparing for this, long before the first snow fell, and Elias had just found the first piece of evidence. For the next 20 minutes, Elias said nothing about what they had found. He knew better than to accuse someone without understanding the whole system first. The small data logger showed Victor Grant's access code, but a code alone was not proof of sabotage. It could have been copied. It could have been used remotely. Elias needed more. He and Marina moved into the maintenance office and closed the door. Outside, the storm continued to pound Blackridge, but inside the tiny room, the only sound was the hum of the diagnostic unit. Elias connected the logger to an older terminal that was not connected to the station network. One by one, the records appeared. Fuel system override, communications interruption, emergency food inventory change, heating controls. Every entry had been made during the 12 hours before the storm arrived. Marina stared at the screen. "He did all of this. The system says his credentials were used." "Why?" Elias scrolled farther. Then he stopped. A second file appeared beneath the access records. It contained a draft transmission addressed to the foundation board. Marina opened it. Her face went pale. The message described Blackridge as operationally compromised and recommended transferring control of the research program to a private energy company at a fraction of its estimated value. "He planned this," she whispered. Elias nodded. The storm wasn't the plan. The storm was the opportunity. Marina looked at him. "But why destroy the food?" Elias pointed to another line in the document. The proposed transfer depended on one condition. The station had to be declared incapable of maintaining operations. Fuel shortages, communications failure, equipment damage, food shortages. The more desperate the station became, the easier it would be to justify an emergency takeover. He wanted the board to believe this place was collapsing, Elias said. Then he'd offer the solution. Marina's hands tightened around the edge of the desk, and my foundation would sell. Probably. For how much? Elias looked at the number. Less than a tenth of the project's value. Marina closed her eyes. For years, Victor had been one of her father's most trusted executives. She had defended him when others questioned his decisions. Now she understood why he had been so calm when the storm arrived. He had known exactly what was coming. The door suddenly opened. Victor stood there. Everything all right? Elias immediately shut the terminal screen. Marina turned toward him. Why are you here? Victor smiled, checking on everyone. His eyes moved to Elias's tool bag, then to the terminal. I heard the auxiliary generator was working again. It is, Elias said. Good. Victor stepped inside. We need to conserve fuel. The storm may last longer than expected. Elias studied him. How long do you think it will last? Victor paused. 3 days, maybe 4. Elias frowned. The current pressure system doesn't suggest 4. Victor's smile tightened. I'm sure the meteorologists will correct you. He turned to leave. Then he stopped. One more thing. The board has authorized me to coordinate emergency operations. Marina looked sharply at him. Since when? Since your condition made it impossible for you to do so. The room became silent. Marina's voice was cold. My condition? Victor nodded politely. This isn't personal. Elias watched him leave. When the door closed, Marina looked furious. He knew the board would do this. Elias nodded. That's why he needed the station to fail. Suddenly, the diagnostic terminal beeped. A new record appeared. Someone had just attempted to delete the access logs remotely. Elias immediately disconnected the system. He knows. Marina looked at him. Knows what? That we found the evidence. A heavy impact shook the station. The lights flickered. Then the heating temperature dropped again. Elias grabbed his jacket. He's not going to wait for the board anymore. Marina followed him. Where are we going? Elias looked toward the generator corridor. To find out what he plans to break next. But before they reached the door, another alarm sounded. This time, it came from the ventilation system. The emergency shelter was losing airflow. And Victor Grant was the only person with administrative access to the ventilation controls. The ventilation alarm began screaming before Elias reached the shelter. Red warning lights flashed along the corridor, and a cold draft suddenly rushed through the building. People stumbled out of their rooms, coughing and pulling blankets around themselves. Elias ran to the emergency control panel and checked the airflow readings. The numbers were falling fast. Close the east vents, he ordered. One of the technicians hesitated. They're already locked. Elias tried the manual override. Nothing happened. Who has administrative control? Marina asked. Elias looked at her. Victor. They found him in the command room, standing calmly in front of the main console. We have a ventilation failure, Marina said. Victor turned toward her. I know. Then fix it. I'm trying. Elias stepped closer to the console. No, you're not. Victor's eyes narrowed. Careful. Elias pointed at the screen. The ventilation controls were changed from this terminal. Victor folded his arms. Are you accusing me again? I'm reading the system. You're a maintenance worker reading a system you don't fully understand. Elias didn't react. Then explain why the emergency ventilation was disabled 6 minutes ago. Victor looked at Marina. He's trying to frighten you. Marina moved closer to the console. Show me the access record. Victor hesitated for half a second. That was enough. Elias saw it. So did Marina. Victor finally opened the log. The latest entry showed Elias's maintenance credentials. Marina stared at the screen. Why does it say Elias authorized the shutdown? Victor turned toward him. That's a good question. Elias's jaw tightened. Those aren't my credentials. The system says they are. Then someone copied them. Victor gave a faint smile. Convenient. Within minutes, suspicion spread through the station. People who had once ignored Elias now whispered that he might have caused the failures himself. Dr. Hale confronted him in the corridor. You have access to every mechanical system here. Elias looked at him. And I spent the last 2 hours keeping those systems alive. We don't know that. You do. Hale looked away. Marina stepped between them. Enough. Victor watched from behind her. He had created exactly what he wanted. Confusion, fear, and distrust. But Elias noticed something nobody else did. Victor wasn't watching the ventilation readings. He was watching the clock. Elias followed his gaze. What happens at midnight? Victor's expression changed. Nothing. Elias didn't believe him. He grabbed Marina's arm gently and pulled her toward the maintenance corridor. We need to leave. They reached the auxiliary control room and found a second problem. The emergency communication system had been disconnected from the main network. Elias examined the cables. One had been deliberately cut and reconnected to a portable transmitter. Why would someone reroute the signal? Marina asked. Elias followed the cable to a small communications device hidden behind the panel. The device was transmitting a message. Marina listened. It was Victor's voice. The station is no longer viable. Emergency control must be transferred immediately. Her face went pale. He's already sending the takeover request. Elias nodded. And if the board receives it before we restore communications, they'll believe everything he says. Marina looked at the transmitter. Can we stop it? Not from here. Then Elias heard footsteps. Victor appeared at the end of the corridor. He was holding a small metal case. You two really should stop digging. Marina stared at him. Did you do this? Victor didn't answer. He simply opened the case and removed a remote control device. You have no idea how fragile this station is. Elias looked at the device. Put it down. Victor smiled. The storm will do the rest. He pressed a button. Somewhere beneath the station, a heavy mechanical lock slammed shut. Elias immediately recognized the sound. The secondary fuel line. The one feeding the only generator still running. Marina looked at him. What did he just do? Elias grabbed his tool bag. He just gave us less than an hour. Then Victor walked away, leaving the three of them separated by a steel security door that had just sealed between them. The steel door slammed shut between Elias and Victor, and for several seconds, nobody moved. The generator room filled with the low mechanical hum of the remaining power system. On the other side of the security door, Victor's footsteps faded into the corridor. Marina stared at Elias. He locked us in. Elias was already examining the hinges. Not exactly. He crouched beside the control box. He locked the fuel line. Can you open it? Eventually. He looked at the pressure gauge. But we don't have much time. The temperature in the room was dropping again. Elias opened his tool bag and began working. Marina watched his hands. They were steady. You always look calm when everything is falling apart. Elias gave a faint smile. I'm not calm. You look calm. That's different. After several tense minutes, he managed to bypass the security lock. The fuel line opened with a deep metallic thud. The generator surged back to full pressure. But instead of celebrating, Elias grabbed the portable diagnostic unit. What? Marina asked. The door wasn't his real trap. He pointed at the screen. Look. The system showed another transmission attempt. Victor wasn't trying to shut down the station anymore. He was preparing to send the Foundation board a complete emergency report blaming Elias for the failures. Marina read the message in silence. It claimed that Elias had accessed restricted systems, damaged the generator, contaminated emergency food, and disabled communications. He's building a case against you, she whispered. Elias nodded, and he's making sure the board receives it before anyone can challenge him. Marina looked at the communications panel. Then we have to get the truth out first. Elias thought for a moment. There may be another way. He remembered the old camera network installed years before the station's main system had been upgraded. It had its own storage drive and didn't depend on the central network. They moved through the maintenance tunnels until they reached a small security room that had been almost forgotten. Elias opened the cabinet. Dust covered the old equipment. He switched on the backup monitor. Nothing happened. Marina looked disappointed. Elias opened the panel and checked the power connection. The camera system isn't dead. He connected a spare battery. One monitor flickered, then another. A series of recordings appeared. Elias searched through the timestamps, hours before the storm. Victor entering the generator room. Victor opening the fuel panel. Victor removing a pressure component. Victor entering the food storage corridor. Victor carrying boxes away. Marina covered her mouth. That's him. Elias kept scrolling. Then they saw something even more damaging. Victor had entered the communications room and used his administrative credentials to alter the emergency systems. Marina stared at the screen. We have everything. Elias nodded. Almost. What else do we need? his voice. Marina frowned. Elias pointed toward the old communications recorder. If they could reconnect it to the station's emergency transmitter, they could broadcast the recordings and the original access logs to the Foundation Board and North Command. But there was one problem. The transmitter was in the command room. Victor had locked it. Elias looked at Marina. "Can you get us inside?" She hesitated. "I know the override." They returned to the command corridor. Victor was waiting. He stood beside the transmitter with the remote control in his hand. "You found the old cameras," he said. Marina stopped. "How did you know?" Victor smiled. "Because I know this station better than either of you." Elias looked at him. "Then you know we have the recordings." Victor's smile disappeared. For the first time, the confidence left his face. "You don't understand what happens if this project collapses." Marina answered. "You tried to make it collapse." Victor shook his head. "I tried to save it." Elias stepped forward. "By destroying the food." Victor said nothing. "By shutting down the heating?" Silence. "By cutting communications?" Victor's jaw tightened. Marina raised the portable recorder. "And by sending false reports using my foundation's name." Victor finally lost his temper. "You have no idea what this project is worth." His voice echoed through the command room. Elias quietly pressed the record button. Victor stopped. Marina looked at him. "Say that again." Victor realized too late. Elias had captured the confession. Then the old transmitter came alive. A green light appeared. Elias connected the evidence drive. One by one, the recordings began transmitting. Victor's own voice, his own movements, his own access codes, his own plan. Outside, the storm still raged, but the truth was finally moving beyond the walls of Blackridge. Minutes later, a reply came through the emergency channel. "Blackridge, North Command has received the transmission. Law enforcement and rescue personnel are being dispatched. Do not allow Victor Grant to leave the command room." Victor stared at the radio. The man who had spent days planning how to control the station suddenly had nowhere to go. Marina looked at Elias. "It's over." Elias shook his head. "Not yet." He pointed toward the temperature monitor. The heating system was still unstable. The station was not safe. "We still have 32 people to bring through the night." And, for the next several hours, Elias stayed beside the generator, keeping the heat alive until the first rescue aircraft finally appeared through the snow. Victor was taken into custody when the storm weakened. The board later confirmed the attempted takeover, the sabotage, and the financial scheme. But when reporters asked Marina who had saved Blackridge, she didn't mention the foundation, the scientists, or the millions of dollars invested in the project. She simply looked at Elias and said, "The man we almost never listened to." When the rescue aircraft finally broke through the storm, the first thing Elias heard was not applause. It was the sound of the station doors opening, and people crying because they could finally see the sky again. The storm had lasted nearly 3 days. By the time the rescue team entered Blackridge, the temperature inside the main facility had fallen so low that ice covered several sections of the walls. Yet every person inside was alive. Elias stood near the generator with grease on his hands and exhaustion written across his face. He had barely slept. Marina found him there just after sunrise. "You should rest," she said. Elias looked at the generator. "It can wait." "No," Marina said quietly. "You can't." He finally stepped away. Outside, rescue crews were taking Victor Grant into custody. The evidence Elias and Marina had transmitted had already been received by the Foundation's attorneys and federal investigators. Victor's attempt to manipulate the project, sabotage the station, and force an emergency sale was now impossible to hide. But when the investigation was over, something unexpected happened. The board offered Elias a senior technical position with a salary large enough to change his life. He turned it down. Marina asked him why. "Because I don't want to become the person everyone listens to only after something goes wrong," he said. "Then what do you want?" Elias looked toward the kitchen. "A better system." He explained that Blackridge needed trained maintenance workers, emergency technicians, and survival specialists who were respected before a crisis happened, not after. He wanted proper training programs, better safety procedures, independent inspections, and emergency supplies that no executive could quietly move without oversight. Marina listened. Then she used her position to make it happen. Months later, Blackridge had changed. The maintenance staff had their own training center. Emergency systems were inspected independently. No single executive could control the station's critical infrastructure. And every new scientist was required to spend time learning from the people responsible for keeping the facility running. Elias became the director of the new emergency operations program. Not because he suddenly earned a doctorate. Not because someone gave him a prestigious title. He simply continued doing what he had always done. He paid attention. He prepared. He helped people. One evening, Marina found him in the kitchen making the same soup he had prepared during the storm. She smiled. "You still make that?" Elias stirred the pot. "People still get cold." She sat at the table. "Do you remember what you told me the first night?" "Probably. Something about you needing to eat." "No, you told me that heat wasn't only something that came from a furnace." Elias smiled. "I remember." Marina looked around the kitchen. The room was full of people. Scientists, technicians, cooks, engineers, everyone eating from the same pot. "I think I finally understand what you meant." Elias looked at her. "What?" "That surviving isn't just about keeping the temperature above freezing." She paused. "It's about making sure nobody feels abandoned when the temperature drops." Elias said nothing. He simply handed her another bowl. Their marriage contract had officially ended weeks earlier, but neither of them had walked away. What began as a transaction had become something neither had planned for. Trust built slowly through hardship, respect earned without being demanded, and affection that didn't need a contract to exist. Marina took a spoonful of soup and smiled. Outside, snow began falling again, softly this time. Not like the storm, not like a warning, just snow. And perhaps that was the lesson Elias had carried with him all along. We often measure people by what we can see on paper. Their job title, their education, their income, their family name, their position in the room. But a title tells us what someone was hired to do. It doesn't tell us who they will become when everything goes wrong. When the lights went out at Blackridge, the people with the most impressive titles could not restart the generator. When the food disappeared, money could not fill their bowls. When fear spread through the station, authority could not make people trust one another. It was the person they had barely noticed who kept working. The person they had called just maintenance, who knew how to keep the fire alive. And sometimes, that is the cruelest irony of all. The people we overlook may be carrying the very strength we will one day need. So perhaps the next time you meet someone whose job seems small, whose clothes seem ordinary, or whose voice isn't the loudest in the room, remember Elias. Look twice. Listen carefully. Because dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carrying a toolbox. Sometimes it stands behind a kitchen counter. Sometimes it serves the last warm bowl to someone else before taking one for itself. And sometimes, when the world becomes unbearably cold, the person everyone ignored becomes the reason everyone else makes it home.